Metroid series is one known for its atmosphere, from the challenge of the original Metroid to the isolation, exploration and growth of Super Metroid, or the truly alive but also very dead world of Metroid Prime's Talon 4. It's something of a consistent theme within the series. Even as the gameplay of each game fluctuates and shifts between each release, this atmosphere, crafted by the worlds that you explore, remains a constant. This is why, even with such stark changes to the gameplay structure, Metroid Fusion still feels like a Metroid game, because its world still has its atmosphere built in the form of its horror elements. This is what makes the series, in my eyes, so fascinating. While most game series are held together by the gameplay, innovating to make the core conceit of the original gameplay system stronger, or stagnating with more of the same, Nintendo's R&D 1, and later Retro Studios, didn't do this. While much of the series' DNA can be found in all of its titles, a focus on the world, using power-ups as keys to unlock doors, the way that this is framed, both mechanically and narratively, differs between each game. Super Metroid and Metroid Prime are probably the two games that most closely resemble a traditional sequel, keeping most of the core structure of the original Metroid. But then there's games like Fusion, which lean much more heavily into the action elements of the gameplay, or Prime 2, which has much more Zelda dungeon-esque design for its locations, rather than trying to make them feel totally connected. And then there's Metroid 2. Yes, we'll get to AM2R eventually, but Metroid 2 is a much more linear take on the original, like Fusion, but with less of a focus on the action and more on the exploration, constantly diving deeper and deeper into the unknown, unsure of what you will find or how two map tiles can exist in the same point of space. Anyway, Metroid 2 has a very specific atmosphere, and given that the series loves to change, it might not be the worst thing if a remake of that game doesn't quite use the same tools to craft its atmosphere. One of a dark and depressing journey told through the highly linear nature of the gameplay, as well as the task of wiping out an entire species, as long as the atmosphere being created still captures the spirit of the original, which is exactly what Dr. M64 did when he made AM2R. Yes, we're finally here. Let's talk about the atmosphere of Another Metroid 2 remake. AM2R is heavily influenced, among other things, by Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime has a laser focus on its world, it's where it derives most of its atmosphere from. Games like Super Metroid rely on how you interact with the world in order to craft an atmosphere, while Metroid Prime is more interested in the world that's being crafted. A lot is explained, even if you don't like to scan about the world and why it's in the state it's in. Super Metroid doesn't really care about the specifics of the world, more on how the world makes you feel. And while I might prefer the latter, they're both equally valid methods of building a world, and it's Prime where AM2R draws most of its influence. From the Chozo Temple to the Hydro Station to the industrial complex or the distribution facility, AM2R loves to show you, although not explicitly, what its world is. It replaces the generic temples previously used to build a sense of mystery and intrigue into more understandable locations, just as Metroid Prime did before. We know exactly what the Phazon mines are for, but Lower Norfair, aside from being the place where Ridley is, could be any number of things, just as the weapons testing facility has an explicit purpose, unlike the mysterious temple that it replaces. If mishandled, this could rob the game of much of its intrigue, replacing these interesting mysteries with generic obvious locations. But there is a reason for this more explicit world building, and I think it creates just as strong a sense of intrigue as Metroid 2, and it's due to the state that you find them in. AM2R is filled with interesting locations, intricate ecosystems of machinery that span the entire explorable planet, that paint a very clear picture, at least on some level, of how the Chozo society functions. Except that it is entirely, utterly alone. AM2R is a game that makes you feel very alone, and the way it achieves this is not only by removing any form of intelligent life that you don't have to euthanize, like Metroid 2 before it, but also by creating a space that should have intelligent life in it, but is hauntingly empty. While Metroid 2 feels claustrophobic, and it uses that to be eerie, AM2R is the opposite. It is way too open. It feels like there should be so much more here than there is, but it's all been wiped out by the Metroids, and it uses that to be eerie. The only thing left on this planet other than the Metroids is the robots that the Chozo left behind, along with a handful of predatory animals. The space pirates of games past are antagonistic, sure, but they're clearly an intelligent race, capable of building infrastructure and spaceships, stuff. By contrast, nothing that you find in AM2R, or for that matter Metroid 2, could have built the world that you explore, and that is the main focal point that AM2R uses to build its atmosphere. Metroid 2 is filled with these large open spaces, but they don't feel large by design. Everything is designed to feel way too close. AM2R widens out that camera not just as a modern convenience, but as a way of making the world feel big. Too big. big. The weapons testing facility is this massive tower with nothing but mindless robots inside. The only thing left in the industrial complex is those robots programmed to protect it. It's been left so long that it's filled with sand by the time you find it. Take the original areas created for the game, the stuff that's not in Metroid 2, because they'll reflect the vision of AM2R more cleanly, because there's no original design to compete with. The distribution facility creates a feeling of being interconnected, with pipes that connect the place together alongside acting as a hub for the entire planet. No such system exists in Metroid 2, and alongside being a faster method of traversing the planet, it also, just like the rest of the design, is something that makes the place feel bigger. And the only thing left to take advantage of the distribution pipes is, well, you. The other original area is a little different, being optional and less gameplay focused. The GFS Throth is a haunting example of what happens to life on this planet. Alongside being a fusion reference, it is incredibly bleak. Everyone is dead, visibly dead this time, and you get to see the fate of anyone idiotic enough to step foot on this planet. Your goal was to kill the Metroids, yes, but it was also to figure out what happened to the research team. Well, you have. They're all gone and there's nothing you can do to change that. The only thing left to do is to do the same thing to the Metroids, the same thing the Metroids have done to this planet. To kill. This is what AM2R does. It uses its higher degree of graphical, auditory, and spatial fidelity as its base to build its mechanisms of creating atmosphere, because in making a more modern experience, it has to gut most of what Metroid 2's atmosphere was built with. AM2R on a surface level seems nothing like Metroid 2. It has a whole host of modern conveniences that Metroid 2 didn't have. A wider FOV, ammo and health recharging at save points, snappy controls, a map that actually makes sense, and Metroid 2's atmosphere was drawn from a lack of all of these things. Like the music. Metroid 2 music is weird. It's grating, most of it is not melodic at all, and it's all intentional. It creates this very airy, strange vibe, because there's nothing you can understand in the music. But AM2R doesn't compose its music in this way, because its music, like the rest of its design, is building to that atmosphere in a different way. AM2R's soundtrack is full of reverb and echo, and backed by walls of droning synthesized strings. Creates a picture of a large, open space, one not filled with life, like a room filled with furniture, but one empty with nothing to catch the sound. And it even uses remixed music, the stuff that doesn't come from Metroid 2, in an intelligent way. This music is not just here for nostalgia. Okay, maybe a little, but more importantly, it can often barely be linked back to the music that it's referencing. The closest piece that comes to being a straight up remake, other than maybe Escape, which is the only song that's really trying to capture the same tone as its predecessor, is probably Power Plant. It has most of the same elements, but instead of creating a frenetic piece like Lower Norfair from which it borrows, it creates a slower, more contemplative track as you explore down to the lowest point of the planet. By contrast, Hydro Station is a remix of Brinstar Overgrown with Vegetation Area, but the instrumentation is completely different, the song has been slowed down, and anything that isn't the mid chord progression has been gutted. I was listening to the two side by side to compare them for this, and even then I could barely place the similarities. Even while actively searching for them, the two tracks do not sound the same. Industrial Complex similarly takes very little. Like, did you even know that this was a remake of Temple Ground's main theme from Prime 2? I know it was from somewhere, but I couldn't place it until I looked where it was from. Isn't that so much more compelling of a feeling than, oh, I remember that? The feeling that something is familiar, but you just can't quite place it. I'm not trying to say it's impossible to recognize these remixes, more that they're not trying to create the feeling of remembering. They're trying to take something familiar and then turn it into something that sounds like you know, but isn't. The soundtrack has been remixed to turn these quiet environmental pieces into these large open soundscapes, full of nothing. Nothing in the sense that there should be something there. Something to catch the sound. Something to operate all this machinery. Something that isn't there. If you tried to create a game like Metroid 2 today, it would be fascinating, yes, but it would also be frustrating, and most people would probably get bored of it pretty quickly. When I played Metroid 2, I did so out of curiosity, not because I was fully engaged in the experience. The way the limitations of the Game Boy created a game that made you feel alone, that was airy, was fascinating, but I would not describe it as fun. It was by no means bad, I enjoyed it quite a bit, but It's not a game I would play again. AM2R doesn't try and create that game but with better graphics. It creates an entirely different experience, one that aligns better with modern design, and shapes that to create an atmosphere similar to Metroid 2, but crafted with different elements. Elements that better reflect the type of game that AM2R is, rather than trying to be something that it's not. This is the greatest strength of AM2R, to be something original while still feeling like it has a similar atmosphere, which is exactly what the Metroid series does. Create games held together not by the minutiae of the gameplay, but through the atmosphere that that gameplay creates. It feels so much like a true, proper Metroid game for this reason, because it isn't afraid to change elements of the design, even if those changes clash with the established atmosphere, because it knows that those changes will still lead back to the same atmosphere, just in a different way. AM2R is a fantastic experience, and one that I appreciate a great deal because despite shifting its gameplay away from the tone that created Metroid 2, it has the foresight to use other aspects of its design to create a similar atmosphere, to create a Metroid 2 that can be enjoyed by a modern audience. It's just a shame Nintendo didn't see it that way. Sorry, I can't end with a shameless copy like that, but I do believe that wholeheartedly. AM2R understands Metroid 2 in a way that Samus Returns just doesn't. Remember that stuff about no intelligent life? Yeah, now Ridley's here, how sick is that? Samus Returns barely has an atmosphere. It's too busy trying to make its gameplay sick and cool and epic, and then by doing so it forgets what makes a Metroid game a Metroid game. It's not about killing stuff with a power suit, or collecting upgrades, or fighting space pirates. It's about the feeling of exploring a world, unsure of what lays ahead. At least to me. From the original Fusion, it's something that the series has always been held together by, and it's something that AM2R absolutely nails.